Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. I thought we would do a live stream here, maybe talk a little bit about the markets, maybe answer a few questions. Um, and I mean, I know the market's not really moving at the current time too much. I mean, we're just kind of chilling here at 76K, but I thought it could be a good time to just talk about things and congratulate this guy on being the first person to comment. So let me just get things set up here. And we will talk. All right. So, all right. So let me see if I can get my screen here. All right. Someone says proper bear market vibes, and we were watching Bitcoin cliff dweller videos. Yeah, well, Bitcoin finally swept this low from April of 2025. We talked about that for a while. The idea here that Bitcoin was going to come back down to these levels and sweep the low. I think the hard part right now is distinguishing between, say, sort of what normally happens in midterm years. And, if you haven't been following this sort of line of thinking, what usually happens in midterm years is you have by the way, if you're just joining, make sure you subscribe to the video, give the video a thumbs up. And again, as I said yesterday, we are having if you use the coupon code ITC50, you can get 50% off on your first month of ITC premium. Links in the description below. So normally what happens is in a midterm year, and sometimes kind of going into the midterm year, Bitcoin first drops below the 50-week moving average, then it goes to the 100, and then after it breaks through the 100, it then pretty typically goes, it usually goes to the 200-week moving average within a couple of months, right? I mean, if you zoom in here to 2014, you can see that once we had our first weekly close below the 100-week moving average, we went to the 200-week moving average within about 5 weeks, so about 1 to 2 months. If you look at the next cycle, it was again 50, 100, and then 2. And after we had our first weekly close below the 100-week moving average, it then took about 4 weeks to get to the 200-week moving average. Now, if you go to that was 2018. If you go look at 2022, you can see that after we had our first weekly close below the 100-week moving average, from there it took about 6 weeks to get to the 200-week moving average. We actually went below it. But the point is on average, it took 5 weeks. Okay, on average. Now, with that said, we already got the weekly close below the 100-week moving average like 2 weeks ago, right? So, we've already gone through this. We're already 2 weeks into this. Now, if on average it takes 5 weeks, that would put us out at the end of February. Now, here's where it gets tricky. This is where it gets tricky. Throughout the entire bull market, sweeping a prior low or kind of just testing it was a pretty good indicator of a counter trend rally that was not always to a higher high, but at least a counter trend rally. You can see that happen many times where we would like sweep a low and then get a rally. It was a very common thing, and it happened several times throughout, sort of the bull market. You would sweep a low, rally for a little bit, and then drop. Okay. Now, the hard part, when you look at the ROI of Bitcoin from the low, right? You go measure the cycle ROI from the low to the low, you get a chart that looks like this. Now, if you continue those into the bottom, what you'll notice is that Bitcoin always topped around the same time in the cycle, right? You see all 3 cycles, how it tops nearly at identical points in time. And then after the top, we then had a bear market, right? And so this one doesn't really look that different qualitatively, right? Like qualitatively, it looks mostly the same. And so from that sense, it seems like, all right, well, it's playing out how it always does, right? So if it's not broke, why try to fix it and just assume we're in a bear market until October, right? That seems like because if you look at when these bear markets bottomed, it took about a year. And if you say take it from now until then and you figure out what the dates would be, it would be within the first 2 weeks of October, approximately. I think maybe between like October 3rd and 11th, but don't quote me on that. It's, plus or minus a few days. Let's just call it first 2 weeks of October, which is somewhat interesting, especially considering that last cycle, which remember the S&P 500 finds bottoms oftentimes in midterm years, and in the last cycle, the S&P found a bottom in the first 2 weeks of October, right? The first half of October. So I want to keep October on our radar. Now, if that's true, there still will be a lot of counter trend rallies along the way. We know that. We expect that. That's nothing normal. Or that's nothing abnormal. It's completely normal for something like that to happen. Now, where it gets somewhat interesting or difficult to sort of think about this is the first cycle where Bitcoin topped on apathy. Now, it has topped on apathy before, but that was in 2019, not at a 4-year cycle top. So it has happened, just not at the end of a 4-year cycle. And so when you top on apathy, the drawdowns they're not as catastrophic, at least not at first. If you look at the ROI from the peak, you'll notice that we haven't had as deep of a drawdown as the other cycles had at this point in time, although the ROI from the last cycle at this point in time is nearly the same as what it was last cycle. So it's not all that different, I guess, in some ways. If you were to look at the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin in 2026 and compare it to 2022, it's at the same spot. Even though it took a completely different path to get there, it's at the same spot. Identically, basically. Identical. If you look at 2018, you can see we found we sort of dropped. We found a low in a few days, then we had a rally, and then ultimately it was a lower high, and then we came back down. And if you look at 2014, you can see we just kind of hovered here, and then we just bled right down. And if this were to play out, then it would just be going straight to the 200-week moving average before getting any type of a bounce. Now, if you average out the prior midterm years, that's where you see we're literally following the average of prior midterm years so far. Okay. Now, the thing we have to consider is here is why not also compare it to the 2019 drop? Because if you do that, then you get a chart that looks like this, which also is at the same ROI as a function of time, right? And if it were to play out like this, then it means we might not get to that 200-week moving average for another couple of months, right? Like if we bounce and then we come back down. So, a lot of people have reached out and they've asked, like, okay, well, is this the time to get back in? And I want to say it like this. I don't know how many of you guys have been following my views. I know, I think more so that people that do ITC Premium probably are a little bit more in tune with what I'm saying because we do more videos over there. But you guys basically know, like, most of it. And essentially what it is if you, right, first of all, if you, and I don't mean to sound insensitive, right? I know some people have altcoins that are down a lot. But if you were able to get out of altcoins a long time ago, based on the Bitcoin dominance views, and if you were able to sell some Bitcoin in Q4 based on the 4-year cycle view that we talked about a lot, and if you were able to experience a lot of the gains in metals that we talked about for the last 5 or 6 years, which I don't even know, I don't even understand people are so upset about it. Look at the chart for gold. Like, like, what is there to even be upset about? You know, like, I mean, yes, so we had a drop down. So what? Right? I mean, the bull market, look at the line chart of gold and imagine being upset about that. Some people are, but I don't really get it, but a lot of people are. So, but imagine like if you fall into those categories where you've been following this channel for years, you pivoted out of altcoins like 4 or 5 years ago into Bitcoin, you rode the Bitcoin dominance train, you were in Bitcoin, and then sometime late October, November, you took some profits once it became clear that the bull market was over. And now you're just kind of waiting, right? You're waiting and you're sweating and you're like, oh, what do I do? You know, is it time to buy? First of all, I'll say this, there's plenty of worse positions to be in, right? I mean, consider yourself fortunate if you have not been sitting in dying altcoins for the last 5 years, and consider yourself fortunate that you rode the Bitcoin dominance train and you have the metal gains, and that you sort of recognize that we were going into a bear market back in October and November, because there's a lot of people that are not in that camp. Now, if you are in any of those camps, just know that I have also been in those camps in prior cycles, right? So like it's not to say that anyone who was able to avoid it is better off or better, because we all just learn our lessons at some point. Whether you learn it this cycle, last cycle, next cycle, doesn't really matter. We all pay our tuition at some point, and then you learn, and then the next cycle you're then a little bit better, right? You're not perfect, but you're a little bit better at it. And so I think if you're not in that position, if you're in the position where you've made a lot of the right sort of timing calls and you've been following what we've said, then consider it sort of a blessing that the hardest thing you have to figure out right now is whether you want to trade this counter trend rally or not, whenever the counter trend rally might happen, whether it happens from the 200-week moving average, whether it happens from now. Like, it's not the worst place to be. My thinking is this, right? My thinking is this. I think it's okay if you want to try to time counter trend rallies. What I will say is this. For me, historically, I have found it is very difficult. It is very difficult because, I mean, anyone can look at the Bitcoin chart and recognize that, this would be the level. Like, if it's going to get a rally, why wouldn't it be here? Seems reasonable, right? I even said before, you could easily have a rally after going below 74K. But the market doesn't always have to make sense, right? Like, there's sometimes where it just doesn't rally. And, there was a great example of that. And this is where I learned my lesson, by the way. So I just want to sort of communicate it. In 2022, after we had this big capitulation, like, Bitcoin had dropped a lot. I mean, from the high, it had already dropped down like 63%, right? And I made a video back then and by the way, when it dropped that amount, it had swept the low, right? So I want you to see I made a video on it back then. And this is something I got wrong back in 2022. So I'm trying to learn my lesson this cycle so that I can at least communicate to you guys, hey, this is what I thought last cycle when we were halfway through the bear market, and I ended up being wrong. And so rather than forget about that, I want to communicate it to you, because I basically accepted last cycle that we were in a bear market, but it took me until January or February back in 2022 to really accept it. Whereas this cycle, I was a little bit quicker to say, hey, we're in a bear market, right? I said it in back in Q4. But what happened is that Bitcoin there was a low, right? And then Bitcoin swept the low. And back then, I was like, all right, well, maybe we can get a counter trend rally. But I was a lot more deterministic about it. I was like, it's time for a rally. And technically, we did get a rally of 27%. But that's not really a lot, considering Bitcoin was still down. I mean, 52% even after that rally. And it was very short-lived, right? It was very short-lived because after that, Bitcoin then just crashed down. From that high, it then crashed another 45% and ended up going to the 200-week moving average within about 5 weeks or so, like it always does. So I want to say, is there a chance that Bitcoin can rally here? Yeah, I mean, it could. I'm not against it if it does. I would like it if it could, because if it doesn't rally here, then this midterm year might end up being a lot worse than people think, you know? Because I'm looking at it, like I'm looking at this chart, this, these QT ending bear market chart and seeing, slightly lower lows and slightly lower highs, which is what I'd like this is how I'd like for it to play out. But I also want to acknowledge, like if it plays out, say like 2014, it's nothing. What if we just go right down to the 200-week moving average, bounce to where we are now, and then go below the 200-week moving average? Like that, there's a chance that could happen too. And I know like some people are going to watch this and sort of poke holes at it and say I'm just too bearish. But remember, like it's easy to do that, right? It's easy for these guys, these influencers, to just constantly laugh and mock. But if you actually go look at the views that many of them have expressed, they've been bull posting literally all the way down. From 126K, they've been bull posting all the way down. And this is the issue. There's three phases of a bear market. There's three phases of a bear market. Okay, 3. And I believe we're currently in phase 2. Phase 1 is where only a few people realize the bear market began. Phase 1 was in Q4. So that was phase 1. That was the first phase of the bear market where only a few people accept it. Okay. Phase 2 is where maybe about half of people accept the bear market. And the other half start to mock those that think it's real, right? And I think that's where we are right now. Because in phase 1, what usually happens is the people that believe we're in a bear market are ignored, right? They are ignored. The bulls basically pay no attention to them because, when you're in a bull market for 3 years, there's been all sorts of false calls for it to be over. So it's easy for bulls to just look at it and dismiss it. Okay. So that's phase 1. But phase 2 is where the bulls start to fight back. They're like, well, hold on a second. You can't be right. But there's a lot of people that would have said if Bitcoin were to put in a lower low, then they would accept that we're in a bear market. Now, that's what just happened. So more people have come into the bear market camp. I would say about maybe 50% of people have accepted it, maybe a little bit more. I know it sometimes like feels like everyone has, but if you go on Twitter and if you go on some areas of YouTube, like there's still a lot of people that have been really bullish and are still really bullish. And the thing is, they call me out on Twitter all the time. I was thinking about this earlier. When I talk about these bearish moves by Bitcoin, oftentimes people call me out and they say I'm too bearish. But then I realize that it's a good thing that there's so many people that think differently. Because if everyone agreed with me, then we probably wouldn't be in a bear market, right? Like if everyone agrees we're in a bear market, that's usually when the bull market starts. So phase 3, which we're not at, I don't think we're in phase 3 yet. But phase 3, everyone agrees we are in a bear market. And when everyone agrees we're in a bear market, that's usually when the bull market starts. Okay? Now, there's going to be some people that will never accept the bear market, right? Some people that will never accept it. And if we bottom in October, they'll just pretend like it's some type of like mid-cycle correction. That's kind of the way they try to get around it. But I think we're not in the beginning phase of phase 2. I think we're like a month or so into phase 2. Because I think some people, it would have been, this was the early phase, right? But I think some people, once it broke below the 100-week moving average, I saw some holdouts be like, all right, it's over. Like it's okay. But this move to 74K has only convinced some people. And the reason is because there's a lot of people sort of banking that it's going to follow NVIDIA where it's going to follow Google. And I talked about this before. I think I talked about it before many of those guys did, where Nvidia swept a low and then rallied to all-time highs. And then where Google did the same thing, where it like swept a macro low and then rallied to all-time highs. Now, I'm not saying that Bitcoin can't do that. What I'm saying is that Bitcoin does not typically follow the stock market in this way. And when you top on apathy rather than euphoria like 2019, it's more likely that Bitcoin continues to show weakness until the stock market shows weakness, and the stock market hasn't showed weakness yet. We need, you could argue we need looser monetary policy. So I think we're in phase 2. I think it's going to take a while for us to get to phase 3. The only way we get to phase 3 quickly is if Bitcoin were to just go down to the 200-week moving average and then drop below it. I think that even if Bitcoin just does exactly what it did over here, where it just kind of consolidates here for a little and then goes down to the 200-week, I think even here there would be people that would argue it's just a mid-cycle correction and that the rest of 2026 could be bullish. I still think it's going to take us a little while to get to phase 3 because I think we will likely have some more counter trend rallies to get people to really get back into the market and believe that it's a super cycle. But as I said before, by the time you convince the super cyclists that they're wrong, and then they capitulate, well, who else do you have left to convince? And that's usually when we start the bull market. So I think we're in phase 2. The most difficult question people have to answer right now is, do we get a counter trend rally from here or not? What I would say is this. I would say if you're going to take a trade, if you're going to take a trade at these levels in the hopes that there's a counter trend rally, just make sure you watch it closely, because like don't get caught up in something like this where it spikes up. So have something that you can use to tell you if you're wrong, right? Be like, all right, I'll take the trade, but I'm going to make sure I get out if we maybe go to a new low or something, or whatever it might be. I'm not financial advice, but I just don't want people to get caught up into this thing, which is something I got caught up in last cycle, where it seemed like it seemed like a good spot for a counter trend rally. It seemed like it, but didn't really happen. It just didn't really happen. So I just want people to be aware of that and not just dismiss it. And that's the reason why I'm not going to be so bold about it. Like, it's possible. It's also possible that, it's possible that a lot of things could happen, right? Who knows what'll happen tomorrow? Maybe a comet will come down. Anything's possible. Just don't get caught up into that, where if you start taking trades and then like Bitcoin doesn't go anywhere for a few weeks, it might actually be because there's not a strong enough bid to actually start the counter trend rally. And that's the most difficult thing about counter trend rallies, is that everyone thinks they know where they're going to start in the bull market or in the bear markets, but no one actually knows, right? No one even knows. In fact, last cycle, if you want to look at it like this and say that this was sort of the first counter trend rally, the next counter trend rally didn't even happen until after we had gone below the 200-week moving average, right? So that's what makes it so difficult. Now, the only reason I'm not as deterministic about it is because we topped on apathy rather than euphoria. And when that happened in 2019, we did get counter trend rallies after sort of sweeping some lows, right? We would see those counter trend rallies. And so that's why I don't want to be too deterministic about it. But my thought process is this. I think Bitcoin is going to go to the 200-week moving average. It's just a matter of what month does it go there. Does it go there in February, March, April, May, June, July? I don't know what month is going to happen. I think it's just going to happen. And I don't think there's anything anyone can do to stop it from happening, frankly. I think like it makes sense mentally that if you have enough people believing you're going to have a counter trend rally at these parts, it could keep the price from falling right down to the 200-week moving average. And maybe you get a sharp counter trend rally back up. Maybe you just get a shorter counter trend rally back up. Either way, it likely results in a lower high, right? Like it probably would be a macro lower high. Now, what's interesting is in 2019, you had some really nice counter trend rallies, but they just didn't lead anywhere. They didn't really take us anywhere new. And it wasn't really until the money printers kicked back on until things got moving. And unfortunately, I think the cryptoverse finds itself in a very precarious position because in order for Bitcoin to really get back into bull mode, you could almost argue that the S&P needs to start going into bear mode for a little bit. And the crazy thing is, what if Bitcoin is showing the S&P where it's going to go? Because Bitcoin's riskier in terms of the volatility. Bitcoin's already at its April 2025 low, right? Like it's already there. What if that's where the stock market goes? Problem is if the stock market gives back all these gains, by late Q3, early Q4, where does that put, crypto, right? Like there's not really a scenario where the stock market could drop that amount, right? Like there's not really a scenario where the stock market could drop 30% from here and Bitcoin hold where it is now. Now, maybe the stock market doesn't go back down there. I'm not really looking for a 30% drop right now in stocks. I think you might have a 10% drop. But I'm not really looking for an immediate 30% drop. I think if it's going to happen, it won't happen. It won't bottom out until probably October, would be my guess. But I just wanted to sort of throw these ideas out there so people can at least see what I'm thinking and not try to jump to any conclusions and not assume that it has to play out any specific way. Because I mean, a lot of people are either in the camp that it's going to go straight down or that we're going to bounce here and go to new all-time highs. I think while you may have a bounce, it will be a lower high. And so it's just a matter of, do you want to trade that idea or not? Is there a chance we bounce to new all-time highs? I mean, I guess it's not like, anything can happen in the markets, but it's not my base case. And it just, I think it couldn't be my base case unless we got weekly closes, multiple weekly closes back above the 50-week moving average. If we have that, then I might be forced to consider that view. But without that, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Until you get multiple weekly closes above the 50-week moving average, especially this early in a midterm year, it kind of just makes sense to assume that eventually the prices will fade. Now, with Ethereum, what I've told you guys for a while is that whenever Bitcoin sweeps its April low, it'll likely correspond to Ethereum sweeping its June low. And sure enough, that's what happened, right? Ethereum swept the low in June, just as Bitcoin swept the low from April. So, the June low for Bitcoin's way up there, and that's why. I mean, the reason why it's so different is because the ETH Bitcoin valuation went up a lot, and we know that it went up a lot after you said it. The ETH Bitcoin or ETH USD went home, as many of you guys, I'm sure, remember, and you can actually see that here. If you look at ETH Bitcoin, right? ETH Bitcoin in April was a lot lower than ETH Bitcoin was in June. So that's my thought process on this stuff. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But it seems likely what's going to happen later this year, right? And later this year, Bitcoin likely has a date with Destiny, the 200-week moving average. Just a matter of when. Does it happen when it normally happens, which would be within about 5 or 6 weeks? Or does it, or less than that, really? I mean, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks. Or does it take a little bit longer? It's the hard part to figure out. So now, if you guys are sort of just tuning in, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. Remember, we do have the coupon ITC50. If you want to enter that over at IT or into the Cryptoverse, you can get 50% off your first month if you use code ITC50. Then also you can check out benjamincowan.com too. All right, what do you guys got? I got a few more minutes. I can take some questions. All right. If there is no 30% drop in the S&P, then there is a chance that the next crypto bull market being a QE bull market. What else could prompt the Fed to move to QE? I mean, unemployment rate going up. Um, it could be a lot of things. The Fed chair that Trump nominated is historically anti QE. He believes in lowering rates a lot more than QE. Um, and I know some people are sort of saying the reason crypto's down is because of that, but I mean the reason crypto's down is just because it's in a bear market. We don't need to overcomplicate it. You can always find a narrative to think about anything. Because if he picked the same person and the prices were going up right now, and it's like if instead of going down to 73K or whatever, if instead they had gone up from the mid 80s, if they had gone back up to 100, everyone would be like, oh, see, Powell's out, and then use that narrative as the reason. Don't use the narrative. Price action is king. The cycles tell you what's happening. It's just a matter of not fading it and kind of sticking to it. ETH touched the middle of the lower band. Dubious speculation will go all the way down. Yeah, so I think with Ethereum, the hard part about this is, it is following that Tesla pattern. And if it does it, it means if it'll hold here for a little bit. So I'll tell you what, I mean, if Ethereum's trading at the same prices in a few weeks, then maybe there's a case for that Tesla comparison to continue. But if I'm being honest, if I didn't know about that Tesla comparison, if I didn't know about it, I would just say the most likely outcome, is maybe it gets a little bit of a move up, and then ultimately something like that, and then eventually it maybe works its way back up. I would say it needs to spend more time in the regression band. If you look at 2016, it only spent 2016, 2017, it didn't really spend that much time in the regression band, just like it did in 2025. But then after the bear market started, it spent a long time in the regression band. So I wonder if this is kind of our initial move to the regression band, and then now we're going to spend a longer time in the regression band now that we've really, topped on apathy. And if you go to the, the social interest, right, you can really see we topped on apathy. And if that happens, maybe the price just slowly bleeds and stays in the regression band for the rest of the year. Always a chance that happens. Yeah, the lower the sort of the quote unquote fair value right now, according to the regression band, is between 2,000 and 2,100. So we're basically right at it right now. The lower part of the band is around 1,400, kind of the same price that it was in April of 2025. We topped on apathy. That's true. I don't know if you guys have heard me say that, but it is a factual statement that Bitcoin in fact did top on apathy. What alts am I buying? Guys, I haven't bought alts in a long time. The only technically altcoin I've even bought was Ethereum, and I bought that in April of 2025. And a little bit before that too, but when it went home was when I got the largest position. And I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, you look at the altcoin market, total 3, you look at it against, say, something like silver, and what do you do with a chart like this? Like, what was the bull case, if you think about it? Since 2021, what was the bull case for altcoins? Because as far as I can tell, they've just been bleeding the lower risk assets. They're at new lows against silver. They're at new lows against gold. I keep telling people to pivot out of altcoins for the last 5 or 6 years, and every time I say it, people get really upset about it, and they just keep on going lower. I will give altcoins credit for one thing: they're really good at bleeding, really, really good at bleeding. But even then, if you look at alts against gold, they just went below their low from 2023. So, to an investor, that's not really a strong bull case long term. That the altcoins are now at lower valuations against a lower risk asset than they were 3 years ago. It's Bitcoin dominance all over again. Just replace Bitcoin dominance with gold dominance. It's the same thing. And it takes a lot of people a long time to agree that that's what's happening, but that's what's happening. And even if you look at altcoins against Bitcoin, You know? I mean, sorry, what am I looking at here? It's total 3 divided by Bitcoin USD. Now, I don't want to look at it divided by Bitcoin USD. I want to look at it by Bitcoin. Right? It's just been going down for the most part. You can look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. This is what we normally look at. And you can just kind of see that it's just been dropping. And when you look at the advanced decline index of the top 100 cryptocurrencies, it's been dropping since 2021. So again, like there hasn't really been a great reason to go buy altcoins as a long-term investment. I know some people can make short-term gains on them, but the problem is a lot of those guys just round trip everything anyways. So I'm not that interested in altcoins. I know a lot of people are, but I think a lot of people are in a lot of pain right now because they've been holding on to altcoins for so long, and the alt season that they were promised by many never actually happened. And I think that what's happening now is the people that sort of promised the alt seasons in prior years are now kicking the can down the road and saying, first it was going to be the beginning of 2026, and it's going to be the middle of 2026. Then eventually they'll just give up and say it'll be in 2027. But that's the reality that we find ourselves in, is like altcoins can continue to bleed for, many, many more months. They don't owe anyone anything, right? If you don't like the alt season that people want, the reason why it's likely not happening is because where are the people that are going to come buy them? If there were people coming into crypto to buy the altcoins, we would see it. But they're leaving, right? People have been leaving crypto since 2021, not coming towards it. Now I think maybe that'll change in maybe 6 months. Maybe we'll see it bottom out and start to go back up. But that's the problem, is every time we've had an alt season, it was a year after social interest started trending back up. But it hasn't even started really trending up. So there's no justification for these views that these guys have on an alt season. And, I've been painted out to be the bad guy for just telling the truth. These guys can't handle the truth. So, it's easy to poke the bear, right? But the reality is most everyone would have just been better off selling their altcoins long ago. And I think the people that get upset the most by it are the people that wish they had sold long ago and are just really hoping for a bounce. I've been in that position before. I was in that position in 2018, and I learned my lesson. And I've spent the last 5 years trying to help other people learn theirs without going through the same pain that I did. Hopefully some people listened and have a portfolio that looks a little bit better today. What is your chess rank? About 1700. The highest I've ever been is 1900. Do I think the 200-day moving average will be tagged? Yeah. So it's tough. At some point, absolutely, right? Like Bitcoin will tag it at some point. It historically does tag it, but knowing exactly when is hard. Could it tag it from here? Maybe. I mean, like maybe it rallies back up to that and this crosses through and then it it hits this level or something. But the hard part right now, if you didn't know anything about the 200-day moving average and all you were looking at is the 100-day moving average, Bitcoin got rejected from that. Right? And if you look at last cycle, it got rejected from it, but then it went through to the 200-day. This cycle, we got rejected from it, and then it put in a lower low, right? So I don't know when it's going to go to the 200-day moving average, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it did at some point in the first half of this year. Like, it seems like it's a likely outcome. But if we're here, maybe it happens like after another drop, I don't know. Like, I wish I could tell you with confidence as to whether that would happen or not. The problem is if it does happen, it's still likely going to be a macro lower high. And then after we hit it, you'd likely have a pretty major sell-off, that counter trend rally back then basically happened in it tagged it at the end of March, right? And the counter trend rally started in January. So it took about 2 months to get up there after the low was set. Um, if you look at 2019, you can see that after it swept a low, it had a rally up to it in a few days, and then it just went to another lower low. Actually, no, that's not. Yeah, it went above it actually, and then it just fell off again. I'm not. My recommendation is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like if you want to take on a trade and bet on something like that, I think just a small amount and cut your losses if it starts breaking down. Don't ride it down to the 200-week moving average, which is likely where it's going to eventually go, regardless of whether it goes to the 200-day moving average or not. YouTube Ben or Twitter Ben? What do you guys think? Bitcoin reaches the 200 moving average the coming week. Would you start accumulating or still wait until October? That's a good question. I might start accumulating. Depends on, I mean, if it happens in the next few weeks. I'll put it this way. Regardless of what I do between now and October, I sure as hell am going to have some cash for October. Okay. I don't know yet what I'm going to do between now and then, but I will not go into the end of the year with no cash, because I think it'll be a good opportunity to get in. And I'd rather try to time that more than try to time other things throughout the entire bear market. Twitter Ben is spicy. Tube Ben lively. Twitter Ben is fun, but YouTube Ben started it all. It's true. If it's just a 2019 style slow bleed bear market, does the alt space get rinsed enough to cleanse enough trash from the crypto space? I think so. Because if it lasts long enough, sure. I mean, if it lasts all year, then sure. I mean, think about how much people don't care now. Imagine if we just do this for the next 8 months. That's why I've tried to get people interested in other asset classes where there's actually bull markets happening. What's your target for October 2026? I don't really have one. I'll say this. I don't care what the price is in October. I'll probably buy there. The only way I wouldn't buy there is if the super cycle guys are right and we're at new all-time highs. And if we're on new all-time highs, I'll probably just I'll keep the Bitcoin that I have. I always keep like 20 to 30% even in the bear markets. Like I'll keep that, but I probably wouldn't touch it at that point. I just let it ride until the whole thing comes crashing down. No, I think I'll buy it regardless of where the price is in October, as long as it's not a new all-time high. ISM 52.6. Yeah, so the ISM narrative has been somewhat pervasive recently. And I wanted to show, I tweeted about this too, but if you look at the ISM, there's actually been plenty of times in history where the ISM was doing the opposite of what Bitcoin was doing. So, like if you look at Bitcoin, so the ISM, it's good for understanding what's going on and say like, the manufacturing sector and like other sectors. So the ISM should be used to say, all right, well, that means manufacturing stocks are going to start to are good. And we've talked about some in ITC Premium, and some of them, well, one of them's up a lot. And we've been talking about some energy stuff that's doing really well. These things that people think are immediately bullish for crypto are actually bullish for other things. So it's not, I don't disagree with them. Like it's great to see the ISM going up, but that doesn't necessarily have to equate to crypto. By the way, the ISM also spiked in January 2025, and then it came right back down for basically the rest of the year. Furthermore, in 2019, the ISM was going down and Bitcoin was going up. In 2014, the ISM was going up, and Bitcoin was going down. So I just don't buy it. Like I don't buy it that it's not a reliable indicator by itself. It's true that when the ISM tops, it corresponds to Bitcoin tops. But why are people thinking it tops in 2026? What what if it tops in 2028 or 2029? You know, I mean, if you look at 2016 when it started going up in January, it didn't top until more than 2 years later. When it started going up in November of 2012, it didn't top until April 2014, halfway through the bear market. So I don't think it's the indicator. I don't think it's the indicator to use. I think, and people have already made fun of this on Twitter, the same guys that make fun of it are the same guys that laughed about me saying that Bitcoin tops 4M2, which I don't know why you laugh at that. I mean, just anyone can look at a damn chart and see that Bitcoin tops 4M2. So in this case, I don't think it's the best indicator to use. I think if Bitcoin's going euphoric and you see the ISM is really high, like in the 60s, then maybe that's a reason to sell. But I mean, I don't think it means anything for Bitcoin. And also, just like the stock market is not the economy, Bitcoin's not the economy. If Bitcoin can go up when the economy is doing bad, and Bitcoin can go down when the economy is good. Like it doesn't always have to correspond. The markets don't always have to make sense. Again, make sure you guys subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. We've got 2,800 people watching, and we've got 643 likes. You guys gotta get to 1,000 likes. I mean, that's not even half you guys. It's midnight here. You guys can give the video a thumbs up. Think energy is the next bull market? That's where my portfolio has been making the most. Metals and energy, and then recently some manufacturing. So that's the stuff that's been doing the best for me. So I'm out here watching these guys talk about the ISM and why it's great for Bitcoin. I'm like, well, it's great for it's great for manufacturing. I'm not sure if it's immediately great for Bitcoin. I mean, gold looks fine to me. I mean, I think it's going to chop around for a while, but I don't know that the bull market for gold is necessarily over. There's a lot of bull markets in the past where gold tops after silver. All right. Can I look at the supply of profit and loss with a moving average applied to it? Sure. All right. So historically, Bitcoin bottoms when these two lines cross. And they have not crossed yet. Now, if we apply a moving average to them, 30-day, it's still going to take a while. Last cycle, they didn't even cross in the 30-day. If we go to a lower time frame, 14-day, they did on the 14-day though. So if you look at the 14-day moving average of this, yeah, it still has some time to close this gap. Is your target for gold high still 6,000? I mean, I think it's going to make it there. If you go back and watch that video from 2020 that I did, I know the title of the video says 6,000, but if you actually watch the video, which I'm sure most people don't do, I talk about it. I think I talk about a range like 6,000 to 7,500 or something like that. But I said back then it was going to take until 2026. So, and 6 years from then would have been the summer of 2026. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get there. It might take longer than that, but I think it will get there. Sub for a couple years, never see me live. Well, here I am. I am real. What is your opinion on the Fed's change and the possible monetary policy shock? I think I talked about that earlier. What's your targeted time frame for a top in uranium? Maybe like 3 to 5 years. I don't know exactly. DXY looks strong here. Yeah, I think the DXY might start turning around. This is actually when it turned around in 2018. You look at if you look at like 2018, it bottomed right around now. Are nuclear companies a good investment? I'm bullish on nuclear, but my PhD is in nuclear engineering. Of course, I'm going to be bullish on nuclear. If I wasn't bullish on nuclear, why the hell did I get a PhD in nuclear engineering? You know, I mean, I'm bullish on it, but I'm biased. Um, is Solana Bitcoin still tracking ETH Bitcoin? I think so. If you look at the Sol Bitcoin pair, yeah, I mean, it looks like it's just gonna. My guess. I mean, I told you guys this. I told you guys this back in the summer of 2024. This thing's coming back down to the lows. It's just a matter of time. You know, it really is. It's just a matter of time before it comes back down here, in my opinion. I mean, I know some people are going to look at this and be like, oh, but it's going to hold support. No, I mean, I don't. I think it's going down. Can I do a video on uranium? I did already. I posted it a few weeks ago. In fact, uranium went up like 20% since that video. So just go to my channel and look it up. I think we posted it around, what was it? I don't know. It was somewhere back over here in early January, I think. By the way, there's a rumor going around that I maybe started that says the bear market's over when I reach 1 million subscribers. I don't know if it's true, but what if it is? All right. Someone says fake news. I don't know. I don't know. At the rate that I'm currently gaining subscribers, it'll take about until October for it to happen. So if you guys want the bear market to be over before then, maybe you need to start subscribing. Someone says I've been watching for 5 years and just subbed. I appreciate that. Um, pull up a stochastic RSI on the uranium chart. The daily's kind of low, but I'm sure you more so care about maybe the weekly or the monthly. The weekly is right here. I think the monthly on this you probably with metals you want to look more at like the monthly. So you can kind of see that it tends to top out around these levels. Which you can see basically if the argument is that we're in a bull market, you can see that every time we get sort of a leg to it, we see it top out and then it cools off for a little bit, right? And right now it's just in the cool off phase. And there's plenty of times where it just kind of goes down, sort of sideways, slightly down to then cool off, and then it just runs again. So right there right now. All right, it's late. It's midnight. I'm leaving. Good to see you guys. Make sure you subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. Again, if you want, check out ITC Premium. You can use the coupon code ITC50. You get 50% off your first month. Links in the description below. I will see you guys next time. Bye.